Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us, some of you from different parts of the world. Thank you, Caroline, for the preparation. And I know there's a lot of work that's gone into this. Caroline is a professor in music education, as she was at Pretoria University. Thank you for this initiative of yours. And I think for many of us who are not teenagers anymore, this is all relevant.
Pleasure, Gert, and thank you and all of you who are attending in inverted commas for this opportunity, which I feel I have somewhat hijacked to talk about a personal research project in which I am currently very interested, and I hope I may be able to interest you too. To put the personal in context, this just shows Roy, Paige, Ship, and I with our respective spouses after a conference of the International Society for Music Education, which has been held somewhere in the world every 2 years since 1953. Just not this year, unfortunately. It should have been in Helsinki. Roy and I have attended quite a number of these conferences together, where we present our research projects. Our better halves get dragged along. But they didn't mind too much when 2018 meant going to an interesting country like Azerbaijan and afterwards traveling through Georgia and Armenia. The photo shows the four of us on that trip against the backdrop of the Caucasus Mountains.
David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this upon the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Now that was just an amateur recording, and I'll explain later why I've included the recording of this particular group. And you will probably all know that that was the Leonard Cohen song playing in the background, Hallelujah. And it was Eureka or Hallelujah that I felt as I thought about the term artistic citizenship, which is used among others by scholars such as the well-known philosopher David Eliot, who is a professor at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development of New York University. And it occurred to me, and I've corresponded with Eliot on the matter, that the view of this concept can be expanded to include specifically artistic senior citizenship. Now, this is a phenomenon which I believe many of us in our Overberg U3A exhibit, and which I came to feel I had witnessed personally in many and varied ways since my husband Peter and I retired to this area. Here is a Venn diagram showing first artistic citizenship, and then artistic senior citizenship, as a subset of the more general artistic citizenship, and then musical senior citizenship as a further subset of artistic citizenship. Now, artistic senior citizenship may, for example, be exhibited by those who choose to take art lessons in their retirement and who can even become notably proficient artists in the latter part of their lives. Here, for one example of such a person, you will see 3 photos of Pieter Stoffberg with paintings he has done. Here's one, here's a completely different one, here's a third painting. Most of you will know Pieter, a retired lawyer who sometimes comes to U3A meetings. The following slide is of a sculpture of Pieter's, a different art form into which he has now extended his artistic efforts. The same applies with photography, which can be viewed as another art form. Here is Charles Nordier, no doubt known to many of you, who these days spends a great deal of time on his photography. And this shot of him was taken by another real photographer, as Charles modestly wrote, while he, Charles, was photographing nature in the Greyton area. Here Charles is again, photographing in an area we all know and love up on Rotary Way. Can anything be more beautiful than the nature itself? Our beloved Fynbos and the mountain and coastline in Walker Bay, which is being captured in photographs. What can make photography an art form rather than a matter of mere record? I think the answer is patently clear in the following photographs Charles sent me and their composition. These he entitled Cradle. This next one, Dance with Me. And the third one, Still Life with Red-billed Teal. Charles described these as images taken in nature for me to choose from if you need any. I call them works of art. Charles also wrote to me a short contribution about his scope of artistic activities, entitled From the R's to the Arts. A former journalist for decades, he says, and I quote, "I did quite a bit of reading and writing, and eventually, as a financial editor, also some arithmetic. So when I retired about a decade ago, I decided to catch up with something completely different, my appreciation of music and visual arts. The first opportunity to also develop some skills in those two areas came when a friend introduced me to nature photography. The second opportunity followed soon thereafter when a family heirloom, a fine old piano, became available. Both activities really took off when we moved to Hermanus from Johannesburg 7 years ago. Charles describes as self-portrait of the aspiring pianist. He wrote about searching for a piano teacher, for a pupil, quote, whose age was about 4 times the average of her other students. Under his teacher's tutelage, he prepared for and passed Eunice's grade 1, 2, and 3 exams within 3 years. No mean feat, and you may imagine the faces of all the local kids reporting for their music exams and finding this old toppy doing the same. All of this occurred while on the photography side he joined the local club, of which he soon, prematurely he calls it, became club chairman, forcing him to give the piano a so-called sabbatical in order to work full steam on photography. He notes, and I quote, "Both activities broadened my mind, improved my insight in the respective fields, and enabled me to keep on growing." End of quote. That is precisely the point of all of this. Former journalists can continue writing, but move into other forms of writing, such as arts journalism. But those who have had totally different careers can also move into print and audiovisual media activities, including arts-related. An example would be Joanna Hardy, now living in Onrus Manor. A former nurse, Joanna began presenting programs for Fine Music Radio, claiming that she knew nothing about music but could talk. And aren't we lucky in our area to have our local Whale Coast radio station, opening up that avenue for those so inclined to offer community service on that platform. Varied manifestations of arts activities interest myself and my co-researcher Roy Page Ship in Pretoria, a physicist who spent most of his working life as a research manager, including 27 years at the CSIR. However, with our particular background, Roy has been singing since his young schoolboy days. We are most interested in the subset musical senior citizenship. You'll see that's underlined there. Because going back to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, well, I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift, the baffled king composing Hallelujah. We, Roy and I, do really care for music and understand the music theoretical knowledge which underlies the references to the chord and to the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. Roy is the gentleman whose voice you heard as the strongest and who is wearing the hat in the performance I showed you earlier by this male barbershop type group in Pretoria known as Mars Boys. The accompanist is my mother, 93-year-old Margaret Rodseth, you'll see the picture of her there, who has been playing the piano continuously for this group for 50 plus years. And that is continuous in its true sense of never ending without interruption. Roy and I, plus an ex-doctoral student of mine, wrote an academic paper together in 2018 for a business journal on this group, entitled Conductorless Singing Group, a particular kind of self-managed team. Here is the journal in which it appeared: Team Performance Management, an international journal. I show you such things as an indication that even amateur music making in a corner of a country at the southern tip of Africa can be of interest to international journals and scholars. And your research material can come from your local activities. You do not have to look for something major or grand to research. Roy, having taught at a business school, and I, who I suppose could be described as a professional in the field of music education, do not feel the least bit disparaging of such topics and the fact that we can write about them for international level publication. What interested us especially, apart from personal involvement with Mars Boys, this name having stuck after my younger brothers and I growing up used to refer to my mother's activity with something like Mars busy with her boys. Roy and I wanted to explore the group dynamics in this 11-man singing ensemble, with members at the time all over 60, and without exception, having occupied senior leadership positions in their working careers. This statement about people who have occupied senior leadership positions in their working careers applies to many of you. And we find it significant that such high-profile individuals in a modern world with so much emphasis on professionalism do not regard amateur arts activities as unprofessional. That is in the sense of its meaning as inept, beneath them. They choose to spend their time in this way, and nor should they feel inferior, nor is any of this of an inferior level. In fact, both its essence and its practice should be celebrated. As someone remarked to me, U3A is a very egalitarian society. Apart from instances of senior citizenship, that is a phenomenon we have also observed in the Overberg. And senior citizenship need also not be practiced in age-based isolation. Often the most successful and mature, in more ways than one, individuals are those who cooperate with others from a range of ages, not only sticking with their peers. Here is one example. Richard Clark, in his 80s, a former researcher in molecular biochemistry at the CSIR, and now a regular presenter for the Pretoria U3A. This is an amateur recording of Richard Clark playing Herbie Hancock's Cantaloupe Island. in a group together with young Pretoria Boys High School saxophone beginners, enhancing the sound of their group with his lovely baritone sax instrument. You'll hear them slight mistakes and all, and I'm sorry for the fact that these musical examples typically just cut off rather abruptly, but it wasn't possible to fade them out as one should do in good music educational practice. Co-researchers and I have the following hypothesis. Retired people have at their disposal a range of musical talents and interests, supported by business, technical, and indeed general life skills, and crucially, available time, which can be put to good use in the development of society. Now, how is it that we think we know this, but want to learn more about its manifestations? Here is one readily available example. That was Busk Aid from Soweto, playing a Carl Jenkins piece that was specially composed for them. Many of you may know the Welsh composer Sir Carl Jenkins from what you've just heard there, and which is perhaps his most famous music, Adiemus. And some of you may recognize the gray-haired lady conductor, even if you did not notice her so clearly as the orchestra, the Busk Aid Orchestra, was playing. This is the conductor Rosemary Nalden, MBE, the award of Member of the Order of the British Empire given to her by the Queen for all her work in musical outreach, who basically, in her retirement from her own performing career as a viola player in London, has been the driving force behind Busk Aid since the early 1990s. Another example would be the Helderberg Village Choir, just over the mountain in Somerset West. I co-authored another academic article in 2019 on this group, entitled Participative Musical Performance, Quality of Life at a Seniors Village in South Africa. After having become particularly interested in them when I learned that a friend of ours, then aged 94, was still loving his singing in the choir, and he wasn't the only nonagenarian doing so in that group. This is significant because so many people feel that post-middle age, their singing voices deteriorate to the point where they are best reserved for shower performances only. It is also significant because it shows how music can continue giving folk pleasure right through their lives. And as my mother phrased it recently, in a WhatsApp to our grandsons, long past when you can no longer ride a bicycle. Another example of this joy which music can offer would be Andrew Bayers, ex-Western Province rugby forward and partner, friend and co-owner with George Hill of Fernkloof Farm, here in the Hemelan-Aarde Valley. Andrew supported George fully in presenting classical concerts on the farm. Some of you may have attended these lovely Sunday morning functions and recognize this shot of the performance venue. Of course, mounting such performances is an example of organizational activities promoting the arts as one manifestation of one's artistic citizenship. I had remembered George telling me about the following, and in an email this past week, George confirmed my recollection and wrote to me about Andrew. I quote, "Classical music sustained him throughout his life and was a great solace during the months when he was bedridden and in pain with a cancer. He said so several times. When I realized right towards the end that he could no longer press the CD player's button, I played Haydn for him, and he nodded that it was helping him a lot." George then added that music is for everybody, not just an enclave of enthusiasts. It is also notable that the anthropologist Margaret Mead, writing early in the last century, stated that nowhere in the world is there any nation or race or group or tribe which does not practice music in some form or another. Needless to say, if a so-called music person like myself says such a thing, others can retort, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But when an anthropologist notes it, the impact is different. You may gather that the quality of performance, how good or how less good it may or may not be, is not necessarily the really critical aspect in the practice of musical senior citizenship. So the point of the Helderberg Village Choir in the example you will see and hear shortly is the clear enjoyment, and not only of the king, that's in the performance of The King and I, the king, Gordon Elms, a former Navy man who then worked for apple growers in Elgin for about 30 years. Gordon was 89 at the time of his item here, together with the choir's current chairman, Shirley Kuttner, a former golf course greenkeeper. Look how they dance too, and enjoy it. With dance, of course, yet another art form that one can choose to practice at whatever age or level of expertise.
The king's name is Gordon.
Then we will move on to the next point about the fact that some retirees also choose to use their artistic inclinations to make general contributions. These could be of an administrative type nature, say. Think of our U3A member Johan Radloff, who in addition to offering music appreciation home groups, gives service on committees such as the Hermanus Music Society and Oak. And that after a career inter alia as a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Many of you may remember a wonderful lecture he gave us about that phase of his life and be interested in this picture, which I got from him of himself as a young captain and flight instructor in Longabon in 1972. Johan, for example, as well as generally arts supportive activities, also makes a direct musical contribution himself, selecting, presenting, and elucidating quality music for the benefit of others. Administrative and organizational activities may be engaged in because people happen to be good at such things, always have been, and so the pleasure may be largely in doing the familiar and doing it well, but perhaps making the contribution within a field such as the arts, different from areas in which they have previously worked. This is the case with the inimitable Mary Forer, director of our wonderful Hermanus Fine Arts Festival, and that as a former physiotherapist. Here is Mary with her husband, urologist turned watercolor painter, Jean, in what she described in her email to me as possibly the last beach picnic they were able to have for a long time with their young families before COVID days. Contributions may also be financial, and this is highly valued in a very disparate society such as South Africa is, with so many needy people and causes. One case would be those who paint or draw to raise funds for our First Friday's Night of 1,000 Drawings every December. Or, for example, there is Lona Stoffberg's Cantare group. Many people will be aware of this group and the fact that they raise funds for a variety of causes, for the night shelter which is busy being built, for Rotary, etc. The fact that this music is made inter alia with a view to putting it to good use in the development of society, as mentioned in the hypothesis I stated above, and as indicated in the title of this presentation, referring to civic good, is a reflection of a statement made in an email to me from the philosopher David Eliot. If they're making music for their own and others' personal joy, this is wonderful. But it's not a subfield within artistic citizenship. It's one more wonderful instance of community music. The journal in which this article was published, that's the one that I already referred to about participative musical performance, and this is a copy of the journal, cover of the journal. You'll see a Springer Journal, Applied Research and Quality of Life, demonstrates that one gets whole journals devoted to such topics. It also shows one aspect of what such musical artistic activity achieves, what is already labeled with the acronym QOL for quality of life. So well known has the concept become in academia that the acronym is widely recognized. And the coined word participative has also become quite generally accepted, with its emphasis not only on participation, but in doing so actively. Active participation, participaction, leads to another concept which is foundational to our research: serious leisure. An American researcher by the name of Robert Stebbins pioneered research on this topic. His first publication about it was in 1982, and into his 80s, he is still writing on the topic and the associated topics of casual leisure and project-based leisure. SLP, for the serious leisure perspective, is another widely recognized acronym. And acronyms for concepts typically constitute recognition of the extent of their use. I believe that many of us would view a great deal of what we choose to do with our time as serious leisure. Also that we have retirement careers. We have taken the step of reinventing ourselves in our retirement, and that reinvention often constitutes a change in personal identity, which also often appears to include the arts. I've mentioned the question of personal identity, but will not pursue the issue of identity further here, although that is a whole field of research in which I'm interested and have been involved, and especially the question of cultural and musical identity. Now here is the Cantare singing group again, with a happy Peter Finlayson on the left-hand side, clearly a main man in the group, and here he is at the center of just the men of that group. I'm sure many of you will recognize Peter. Also Peter Stoffberg, again, right on the left, who sings too as an artistic activity, in addition to painting and sculpting. Plus there are other locals, such as, on the right-hand side, Dominee Corneille of the Niekerk in Hermanus, and Dave Wright, second from the left, who told me of how he kept his sanity in the Johannesburg corporate world in two ways, by running and with music, and who had his first singing lesson at the age of 58. Then there's Johan van der Merwe, second from the right, who, after being a professor both and of public relations and communication, researched Noel Coward and reporter for the group, and then wrote those scripts and narrated them. He has also directed many plays over many years, lately for the Milnerton Playhouse in Cape Town, and played small parts in Afrikaans movies and a TV soap, drama or theatre activities in addition to those musical. Peter Finlayson told me personally that he has reinvented himself in his retirement. He is still thought of as a winemaker, which one can add can also be regarded as an artistic activity, and is still quite active in the wine world, but his immediate reaction about reinvention was with my singing. Music making is well positioned as a context for positive and creative aging in community. In a 2006 book entitled Artistic Citizenship, a Public Voice for the Arts, the authors explored the role of the artist, and of course that's artist in the broadest sense, in social and cultural terms. They asked the question, how do people in the creative arts prepare for and participate in civic life? Musically active senior citizens cannot automatically be regarded as being wholly in the creative arts. Nevertheless, it can be contended that their music making can provide a public voice for the arts. And in that sense, they can even be seen as artivists, the portmanteau term denoting a combination of art and activism, now widely accepted in academic discourse. Aspects such as the betterment of other people's lives, for example, by performances, and general social well-being thus generated, in addition to their own social well-being, are relevant, and so is what is known as the ethic of care. We think further about what many philosophers throughout history consider to be the highest human values. A virtuous life well lived, a life of well-being, flourishing, fulfillment, and constructive happiness for the benefit of oneself. You will see there the words good to be and good to do. To quote David Eliot again, that was the whole quotation from David Eliot, from A Virtuous Life Well Lived. Of interest to Roy and myself, at any rate, as researchers in this field, is what is known as the two value drivers of decision making, what kind of person you are, good to be, and what practical contributions you make, good to do. So to add to a virtuous life, well lived, or a life of well-being, flourishing, fulfillment, and constructive happiness for the benefit of oneself and others, we note that the first part, for the benefit of oneself, has to do with good to be, and the reference to others is the good to do part. In this connection, we are reminded that original ancient Greek democracy provided citizenship only for those who had the necessary serious as opposed to casual leisure to make a contribution. This is an interesting point for us all to consider, even so many years later, and in South Africa rather than in Greece. It might even be cause to call out Eureka in its ancient true Greek sense. In closing, what would Roy and I like to ask from you and from other potentially interested and active senior citizenshippers you may know? I indicated at the beginning that I was really hijacking this session for own research purposes. And best of all would be if we could find any of you or those of whom you may know who could even be interested in helping with this particular project. Please consider completing and returning questionnaires, which I do hope you won't mind being sent to you by email after this presentation. We look forward to information, ideas, and examples you may be able to give us to establish and extend our knowledge base. Our questions are compiled bearing in mind a series of circles of increasing impact as follows. Improving your own or significant others' QOL, quality of life, that is mainly the good to be part. Improving the QOL of your own demographic slice, good to do. Improving QOL for a disadvantaged portion of the citizenry, that is even more good to do. And generating spin-off effects that change society or improve it as a whole, obviously good to do. If you would be prepared to give us an interview, we can contact you to make such arrangements. And then I have to say, as an academic, please note that this project receives no direct funding, but is conducted in terms of the research and ethical norms of the University of Pretoria, which was my main academic employer during my working life, via the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Needless to say, responding to a questionnaire or granting an interview is entirely voluntary, but I hope I can thank at least some of you in advance, as I thank you for listening to this presentation this morning.
The David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this, and on the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Wonderful, Caroline. Thank you very, very much for a fascinating presentation.
Are there any questions? I see there are some very nice and positive messages for me at the bottom of the screen, but those are not really questions. I'll thank the people for those afterwards.
How do we partake in your research, Carolyn, if we are interested in doing so?
If I could send you a question, well, I will be sending questionnaires to everyone whose emails we have from this presentation, but answering those questionnaires will give us more data in terms of the different varieties of activities that people engage in, artistic senior citizenship activities. It would also be very helpful to receive the names of other people who may be very good examples of senior citizenship in an artistic way and specifically in a musical way. So any such information I would really welcome if you could send me by email.
I'm interested, Caroline, in the intergenerational aspect of some of this work too. Seeing younger children working with the older children and younger children going in, for instance, into care homes and the advantages of that sort of work. And I wonder if your research might ever begin to extend into that. Music making is one of those art forms that can be intergenerational.
Absolutely, and that was why I mentioned that any form of artistic senior citizenship need not be practiced in age-based isolation. If you look at someone like Richard Koch playing with young high school boys, none of whom have a baritone sax, and he's got that lovely and very expensive instrument. There's a lot of work I think that older people can do, and I think it goes back to a person like Maria Montessori, who so long ago suggested that actually it would be a very good thing for society if old age homes or retirement homes, or call them what you will, were to be built alongside orphanages.
Thank you once again, Caroline, for a fascinating presentation. Thank you for all the preparation and the very interesting examples you were able to show us today of people that have found enjoyment through their creativity at the later stage in their life. It's a good thing to realize that enjoyment and participation are probably more important than talent only. Thank you very much for all those that have participated this morning. I'm going to end the meeting now. Goodbye.